Emily. Yeah, a little confusing to have two such close names, huh? But it's awesome. I'm really thankful to welcome Melanie into this, and she and I have had some great conversations and share a lot of viewpoints. Welcome to everybody who's here and joining from so many different areas across the country, and we really appreciate that, and we're really thankful for the technology and the opportunity to be able to do this. It's a privilege to engage in this kind of conversation because if you haven't been around Wagner before, we really have a passion and a heart for not-for-profits, and this is just so fun for us. So thank you for responding to the questions. How it's going to work today is a little bit different than like a traditional pushing out of information type webinar. We're going to interact as much as possible, and we have a few guest speakers that are going to pop in and share some of their examples throughout. I'm going to summarize and share some of the examples that came in through the questions. And as time allows, if you want to raise your hand, Emily can unmute you and we will try and interact that way as well. We'll see how that works with this volume of people. But this is so exciting, and two quotes have come to mind in the last couple of days. One was the innovator die, which is very much appropriate in this time frame. And the other, it was interesting, I'm currently doing a series or conference that was supposed to be live 5 weeks ago, and they had to flex it to an online event. And they brought up the very quote that I was thinking of, that necessity is the mother of invention, that Plato said way back when. So what a great time for us to explore this and to look at it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie to talk about innovation and give us a definition before we move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Melody, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. One of my favorite topics, and it has been just inspiring to see so much new that is happening out there in the sector and of course in the world in general. But I've also found that innovation is one of those things that everyone really does think about it a little bit differently. And we often come into that conversation about innovation with our own preconceived ideas. And so wanted an opportunity to level set for all of us in this conversation today in terms of what is innovation? What's our baseline that we'll be working from today, and encourage those in the chat to weigh in on this as well. If you have a different way of looking at it. I'm offering up through the slide here that basis of innovation as something different that has an impact. And this is a very succinct definition put forward by Scott Anthony, who is a thought leader in the realm of innovation and growth organizations. And that's expanded upon a bit in the Little Black Book of Innovation. And it expands that to be that, think about innovation as a process. And it's a process that combines discovering an opportunity with blueprinting an idea to seize the opportunity, and then implementing that idea to achieve results. And so if we think about it, it's identifying the opportunity or the need, testing out, blueprinting, thinking through how you're going to address that need, and then implementing the idea to actually achieve the results. I think that's one of the key components that people often forget about innovation. We think about it as the idea and the excitement of ideation and creativity, but innovation without action doesn't exist. You have to have an impact. You have to see something realized in order for it to be innovative. And I think another component is that we also think about that one size fits all for innovation. And in fact, that's just not true. For every organization, innovation in terms of the scale can be something completely different. And so what might seem to be sort of normal course of action for organization A, B, and C could in fact be something different that has an incredible impact for organization D. And so it's just thinking about it really differently and knowing that you can have this kind of spark of innovation or the core innovation that's about more research and thinking through what's the problem and what's needed to solve it. And that explosive innovation that is more about, we know what the problem is, but we have to bring in all sorts of different perspectives to really solve it. and then that evolution, which is a lot of the space that we see the nonprofits in and organizations and individuals in right now, that's much more about sustaining. We know what the problem is and we know how we need to solve it. We just have to focus on doing it and figuring out what's going to work, which is different from the disruptive innovation that often gets talked about, where it is really about trying to figure out what's the issue, how are we going to solve it, and how are we going to transform our business models. So put that forward as thinking, again, we need to know what the issue or the need is, what the skills are going to be, how we can blueprint our way there, and then act on it.
Awesome. So obviously the path forward has a fair amount of uncertainty at this point. And to start off, again, we want this to be time for peer interaction and learning from your peers. So Emily, if you would put up the first poll, we want to know what your organization is doing during the pandemic. Are you basically focused on business as usual, maybe modifying to remote work, but otherwise pretty much normal? Have you significantly reduced activities or programs? Are you shifting resources so that only the most critical mission central things are being done? And I'll tell you some of the ideas and or expanded programs and operations to meet the increased needs. Oops. So Emily, how did we come in on this one?
Yeah, just a couple more seconds and then there you go.
Wow, the bulk of you are in the innovation, innovative new ways to serve our clients and continue meeting their needs. That is so wonderful to hear and very encouraging. And honestly, not that surprising to me, because the group of nonprofits that I have had the privilege of working with are very mission focused and willing to flex and do what they need to accomplish what's going on. So I want to go ahead and do a second one here at the same time. So Emily, if you can put up the second poll question that looks at what your organization is doing. And in this case, check all of them that apply. Are you excited about the future and new opportunities? Realizing, maybe begrudgingly, that you need to embrace change, continuing as usual, learning valuable lessons, and gaining a new understanding of what's working well and what needs to be changed. And as I give you a minute to answer that, that's one thing that both Melanie and I really want to emphasize out of today, is the importance of taking the intentional time during this pandemic and the flexibility that we've had to adapt to learn. Because this is a great learning opportunity to see and evaluate what you have been doing, as well as innovating some of those things for the future. So how did we do, Emily? Wow, realizing the need to embrace change and innovation and learning valuable lessons are the top. I so appreciate that. What a wonderful statement of this nonprofit community, that you are so adaptive to change and wanting to be flexible in all of that. So one of the seminars one of the conference sessions that I attended is talking about a critical inflection point, which is definitely what's happening here. And how do we respond to that critical inflection point? Now, our first question to you was to ask about how you're doing work. So some of the most common themes that we saw here were obviously that you've had to do remote work. And I heard a great definition in the last couple of days that the person emphasized wanting to call it remote work versus virtual. Now, again, it can be semantics and not a huge deal, but this speaker's point was that remote says we're still there, we're just not in the same space. Virtual makes it seem like it doesn't exist. So maybe an important terminology, maybe not, but definitely a lot of remote work happening right now. The other thing is staying connected. It is so critical to stay connected right now with personal communications on your team, these Zoom meetings, the different learning opportunities. Again, it was really encouraging to see the number of people who said they're taking this opportunity to have staff train or do some learning opportunities. So that's wonderful. But but keeping that personal connection with both your team and with your donor base, which was something we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago. Flexibility is obviously important, and I noted a couple of people that have flexible work schedules, which when that's possible is such a good response in this case, because it allows for those different rhythms in the households where it's happening. Some have children, some don't. We all have different circumstances that we're trying to work around. And how do you keep your employees engaged? I know that I've seen a couple of great ideas in the responses we got, as well as from Emily, who is keeping us at Wagner engaged through things like staff training, but a creative one, virtual happy hours or virtual lunches that we've done. So those are some great ways to informally still stay connected to your team. What I want to spend the bulk of time on with this particular question is on the process and internal control changes, because from an auditor standpoint, obviously that's important, but it's also important to the integrity and longevity of your organization to make sure that it's maintaining the integrity of your assets and information. So in reading through these, saw a great example from Sarah. So if Sarah would hop on here, I would love for her to share how they have adapted their internal controls.
Okay, yes. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. So yeah, so it was a bit of a challenge for us, but we decided to use Zoom, like everybody else probably. But regarding the internal controls, so the accountant of my organization is a 1099. So before she used to come person once a week, and then we would exchange via email. So now we do that by Zoom, and so I will have the mail brought to me by the vice president of the board actually, and then I will open the mail in with the accountants so she can see that. And for instance, any invoices will be entered by her while we are in the Zoom meeting directly in the QuickBooks. And if I have to sign any check, because I'm the one with the signing authorization, I will give her the number of the check so she can also enter it in the QuickBooks, and then with the bank she can double verify when the check has cleared and which number it is. So I mail her afterwards, after those meetings, the next day, the Saturday, I mail her all of the documentation. And if we have received any check to be deposited at the bank, because I recover from surgery, I can't drive very well, she can deposit it at the bank. So that's how we have done, with the accounting, and also we will be now tracking the PPL fund very seriously.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. There was another one that came in that I'd like if Tracy would jump on and share how they have adapted their internal controls.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so we are using Zoom to open mail also, and to log checks on a daily basis, because we would have a two-person process for that. We're using Zoom to upload positive pay files, so whenever we have a check run, we are able to share screens. And I'm sorry, we're using Microsoft Teams for the positive pay files. And another staff is viewing me uploading that file, comparing that the file has not changed when uploaded to the bank. And we've also, since we had fraud on a couple checks in the past 2 years, we're really starting to implement payment of vendors via EFT and NACHO files. And this has just escalated that, because our CEO has not been in the office to sign checks. So that's just a little more challenging, and it's a little more secure paying vendors that way too. So this has really become more important now.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Sarah or Tracy. I really love both of these examples, because it's telling us too that we're identifying some things that could have been done differently, even without the pandemic situation, kind of pivoting our thinking and ways that we can improve going forward. Having separation of duties has always been a challenge for smaller nonprofits. What a cool idea to use Microsoft Teams or Zoom or other ways to share that space. You don't have to necessarily be in the exact same space. Using the things with positive pay and other tools that will allow you to look at it. Another one that came up in the responses was they called it creating an understudy for each critical job function. And there's something else that is a critical function of cross-training, but how often do we take the time to do it? Because mission gets promoted and there's so much that just has to be done that sometimes the important doesn't get done because we're busy with the urgent. So I thought those were all great examples of things and ways that they've adapted their internal controls and things that we can do going forward. Melanie, thoughts to share or add?
Yeah, I think, Melody, what you said about particularly thinking on a lot of this is best practice that we just don't get to. And so if we think about like the understudy for positions, a lot of that comes down to the importance of having business continuity plans and procedures and templates. And those things that now when perhaps some of your staff have time to be able to look at some of those more administrative tasks, or if you were going as one of the organizations or those that responded that this has really changed or prompted you to think about how to move things forward, it's a great time to start documenting what's important, what is our current state, making those journals and those lists of these are the things that we've had to do differently, so that you can use that as great data to fuel your continued innovation, move forward as an organization. It's really very exciting. It's also been good to see in the chat, some folks trying to find that future balance between being able to leverage some of the benefits of video conferences with team members and clients that are in multiple locations. How much easier is all of this going to be for all of us now that we've been forced to learn and use these technologies? But to not overlook the value of that face-to-face. And Melody, you've talked about that too. It's great to be able to have different ways of pulling in information and absorbing things, but there's something special about that actual physical face-to-face interaction. So how to find the balance going forward.
Awesome. So I'd like to move it was actually our third question on the registration about how you're adapting events in particular. And there's obviously a number of different kinds of events that can be impacted by this, because by its very nature, most of the time, traditionally, we've thought of events as face-to-face opportunities because there is value, as Melanie was saying, in that interaction. But we have to be adaptable. I want to right away jump to a couple of examples of program or kind of celebration examples, because fundraising, we've been getting more creative and we've done some cool things, and I'll share some ideas. But how do you flex your program when it's face-to-face? So I'm going to turn it over here to my daughter, Hannah, who works for an environmental nonprofit. And obviously being outdoors for programming is important to them, and she's going to share how they had to adapt.
Hi, my name is Hannah. That's my mom. She's pretty neat. So like she said, I work for an environmental nonprofit located in Dane County. So that involves getting outside and doing a lot of monitoring work and preservation work and environmental education. So obviously we are all limited right now in our ability to get outside and to be together. So we've had to really adapt and innovate on how we've been providing outdoor experiences for our supporters and our constituents and people who want to work and play and live in our watershed. So this past winter, we were granted funds from the Dane County Parks Foundation to create an interactive outdoor learning series, which we called the Watershed Explorers series. And these are initially meant to be 60 to 90-minute outings into various unique natural and historical areas of our watershed. Obviously, we can't get outside and explore together, like I already said. So we've started to adapt and make these online experiences. Our first one, which was called Into the Forest, was meant to be an interactive hike through Stewart Lake County Park with our board president, and he was going to go through the ecology of trees and teach us how to identify various trees and species. So instead of us doing that together on a hike, he filmed clips of himself, and then we worked to make it into an interactive video that we posted to our social media and our website. We learned that it takes a lot longer to put together videos, and that there's a lot of work that goes into it and a lot of training that you need. And it takes longer than you expect for videos and social media to make them quality and to present content that people want to interact with. So we've been innovating and adapting on and learning a lot on how to do that well. And then our next event in the series, instead of it being video based, we're working to do a interactive hike style through a GPS app. So you can take the app yourself with your family and walk through the park and stop along specific points along the trail, and there'll be some photos in the app and some educational information, some that will be tailored towards adults and others for kiddos.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Obviously, I'm very proud of the work that she is doing and following in nonprofit community, and that creativity too that comes with youth, I so admire. I want to share a couple others that came in via the responses to the questions. Some of them are things that have been in the news, like the virtual telehealth, virtual vision screenings, virtual trainings, virtual triage calls for healthcare, some of those kind of things. A lot of our nonprofits are working in that space and doing that kind of work. Another one, I'm going to read this one because it's hard to recap, and I think it's important to share. We're working with 3 Area United Ways and other nonprofits that serve our shared clientele to help educate them on COVID-19 and what services are still being offered. We've been trying to find more ways to reach out to the Spanish-speaking population because they are not watching the nightly news or reading the newspaper to understand the importance of social distancing and precautions that need to be taken. Working with the vulnerable population really rallies nonprofits together. I loved that phrase because that's so true, and it's such an important piece of what we are doing. Another comment in here, I'll share some more program examples here in a second, but another just comment was they've really appreciated the fact in trainings how genuine and authentic that the trainings and the presenters are, and that sense of community versus being a polished event. And obviously there is balance to anything, but I appreciate that too because it creates more of a welcoming environment. Here's another one. They're collaborating with a few other community-based organizations to create e-learning kits for students. What a great idea. I know we have a great friend who's a teacher, and they struggle with these kiddos having enough resources, especially again with underserved populations. Partnering to share story hours, poetry readings, music events, etc. online. I love that. What a great way when we can't share those kind of things. We all love the arts and certain things in that realm. So what a great way to share that. Here's another one. We've partnered with the Janesville Art League to create a public art campaign focusing on spreading gratitude and good cheer to our first responders and essential workers. It's been a heartfelt and meaningful program that's gotten many folks involved, and we have had hospital workers come across the street to thank us for doing this. What a great way to take their mission and adapt it to the given crisis and create some programming that wasn't necessarily part of their normal programming otherwise. Another one with youth services, we're connecting with multiple providers that include community advocates, Office of Violent Prevention through the Mayor's Office, a United Neighborhood Center, a school extension, a hunger task force, and they've all come together to support the food pantry. So important element there, but then one step further, they're also working with the Department of Aging to help guide and support older adults who need that support with food as well. So again, great ways to achieve mission and collaborate to a certain extent at the same time. Restaurant associations are utilizing other resources, obviously, because of the situation. And they're taking this time to develop specific guidance and protocols for business and looking at ways that it's going to change the landscape and how we move forward. I'd like to shift now to somebody else who is adapting their program. They have a celebration event once a year, and obviously that couldn't happen in person. So if Debbie would be willing to please hop on and share how they shifted their event.
So our event is a fundraiser and a celebration awards event. And our initial reaction was that because we couldn't have it, we needed to cancel it completely. And we did that. We called all of our sponsors and we asked them if we could keep their sponsorship funds to support our programs. And everyone was willing to do that. And once we got out of that knee-jerk reaction of, oh my gosh, we have to cancel this because we don't know how to do anything different, we decided that we were going to switch to a virtual event. And what we found is that our event would normally have about 200 people in attendance. So we needed to pivot in terms of what kind of platforming we were using. We looked at Zoom, but as many of you know, the version of Zoom that we use only allows for 100 people, and we were hoping that we would have more than that. And so we did some research and found that there's an interaction between Zoom and YouTube. It allows for the chat function like you have on Zoom. And so we were able to tape a lot of the pieces to the ceremony itself. The keynote was taped. We had a dyslexia simulation that was also taped, and it was interactive with the participants. So we told them in advance the tools that they needed to bring, which were just pencil and paper, so that they could participate. And then we taped all of the award acceptances. We put that together as a full video. And we had an in-person master of ceremonies. And so we went back and forth between the taped sections of the program and the awards and the master of ceremonies. And one of the things that we found is that because we're a statewide organization, we had a hard time getting people from around the state to actually attend this event. But the awards really are given to people throughout the state. And so we had members from organizations that wouldn't normally be able to participate that were able to actually participate and learn about what's going on in literacy in the state of Wisconsin. So for us, we were able to engage people that we weren't able to engage in the past. We ended up having about 170 people participate in the event, and we were really thrilled with the outcome of it. Because we are watching our finances, we didn't want to upgrade to the Zoom Pro. I know there was just a comment about that. But we found for us that the technology that we used worked well. So we're happy with the results that we had.
Thank you, Debbie. I really appreciate these people who are willing to share some of their ideas. And if you have something you want to contribute, you know, again, you can raise your hand and Emily will be able to unmute you so you can share. One of the things that happens for membership associations is they usually have some big events and conferences. So I wanted to share one from a membership kind of organization that works with bowling events and bowling organizations. So in the moment, there's been no way to pivot and do things remotely or virtually for some of that. So instead, they're looking and taking this time to do short training and meetings and look at possibilities for the future and looking at adapting in a longer term basis, because not all things can be necessarily adapted on a short term. As we were getting the call set up, I mentioned I was to speak in Texas at the beginning of April at a conference that's a 3-day conference. And obviously that got canceled. And so they had to flex within a very short window of 4 to 5 weeks and created a week-long online event. And while there's pros and cons, again, to person versus remote, I have to say that given the short time frame they had, they've done an amazing job of making it learning and interactive. Because the hardest thing when you're flexing some of these things to online, as our different examples have pointed out, is making sure that it's adaptive and inclusive and that there's a way to have a voice. So for this particular conference, they create some follow-up Zoom meetings after a talk to share some ideas, or they have times where you can sit down with an expert one-on-one or share in a smaller group. And I'm gonna flip it over to Melanie because I know she's used or experimented and thinking about experimenting more with creating breakout rooms in Zoom. So Melanie, you wanna share?
Absolutely. So yeah, with Zoom meetings, you can go in and adjust your settings within, all have to go into your settings, and there's a whole lot of things that you can discover in terms of flexibility in there. But with breakout rooms, it's a great opportunity to have the system automatically disperse people into whatever number you've determined, whether it's 2 to 3, 4 to 6, or 8 or more. And it will take all of your participants and put them into breakout rooms. You can also assign them manually if you'd prefer to do that. And it's helpful when doing that to add the disclaimer, particularly with large groups that are automatically put into rooms, that if for some reason they end up in a room with someone that makes them uncomfortable, and there are some fun stories you can use around that framing, they can pop back out and ask to be put into a different breakout room, and the meeting facilitator can do that. So it is a really wonderful way to allow people to feel like they're at a table. It's like when we go into that in-person workshop or conference and we have to pick our table in the room, and then everyone sits down and like has that moment of a little bit of uncomfortableness for some of us, and for others, they're like ready to meet new people. And then have that ability to talk with each other and exchange information in a way that it also stays at the table. So when you're in a breakout room, what happens in the breakout session stays in the breakout session until you bring it in back into the main room. So there are some fun ways to do that. But it does also go back to, Melody, what you were saying about that the inclusion aspect and making sure there's accessibility and kind of level setting, so that you create those rules of engagement for people that say, bring other people into the conversation, make sure that no one is dominating, who's going to be the one to save our chat and carry our information forward. Again, a lot of those really good facilitation techniques and other things that are good practice are now just coming more to the fore as ways to really boost engagement. And I think
that is so cool. And the only thing I haven't figured out is how do we factor food into our virtual conferences? Because food is such an important part of getting together.
Well, one of the things that I've talked about with some people is making sure that you make an announcement that you might start your meeting at the 5 minutes after, or create other things. Also, there have been where you have the stand-up breaks depending upon how long your session is. Unfortunately, you don't have the catered aspect of it anymore. You're sort of responsible for your own snacks. But the upside of that is you're responsible for your own snacks. So you get to eat or consume whatever you'd like in there. And one of the things is to have people share that. So similarly, if you were in a room, you'd get to see what everyone was eating. You'd be watching everyone eating. And you can do the same thing with video. I mean, I've done that where we'll take the video down and I'll show my plate of whatever I'm going to be eating during the meeting. And that's just part of also creating that more human connection. Which I think
it's hard to create some of that face-to-face remotely, and food is definitely an equalizer in that regard. Mm-hmm. Emily, would you please put up, it's out of order, but poll number 4 around the fundraising events. And as you do that, I was going to share one other scenario that came out of some of what we were talking about at the conference I'm attending remotely. The point of making as we're going to more remote and more, online kind of presentations, upping our websites and so forth, is are we making them ADA compliant? And his point was, why is the for-profit world leading in this when the nonprofit world cares so much about those who are underserved or disabled or have special needs and not doing this? So just throwing that one in there as a bonus for a second, because it really hit home with me when I heard that. So for you, fundraising events, again, choose all of them that apply for you. Are they critical to your funding? Are they cost effective? Have you seen consistent decrease in attendance over time? Do you view them as time consuming and expensive? And have you considered the fact that they'll likely never be the same? So Emily, when you get those results for us.
We'll just give people a couple more seconds to get your answers in.
One of the things is that results are coming in that I thought was interesting with a lot of the conversation about moving to online events. There was an article that circulated recently, it was either Fast Company or Forbes, with some of those ideas, but there was a point in there that I thought was really interesting, that as we think about planning events differently and even structuring them differently, that now is the time to move into more of a cinematic mindset than a theatrical mindset. And I thought, oh, that is very true. The difference between seeing it on the screen and seeing it in person experience. So we all get to put on our La La Land talents.
There you go.
Explore those a little bit differently than our Broadway view that it's been.
So it looks like for the majority of our audience, fundraising events are critical. And one of the things that I would point out here is to go back and identify who is really the audience that you're appealing to. Make sure that you understand who you're messaging, because otherwise our message sometimes can become really broad and hard to understand and or attract the people that we intended. The advantage to this is if we identify that from a fundraising perspective, now we can possibly open the doors to seeing other ways that we can hold fundraisers that aren't just the traditional live events or galas. And nothing wrong with those. We've talked about some of the advantages of that, but we obviously also have to be adaptable. And with that, I'm going to kind of move us to, it crosses over a lot of these topics, to talking about what I talked about with collaboration and or innovation throughout. Collaboration to me, back to Melanie's point of making sure that we have common language, is when there's actually a true transformative change. And collaboration generally happens in stages. It isn't something that just you flip the switch and it's done kind of thing. And what we're seeing right now in the examples you're sharing with us are ways that you're cooperating and coordinating. And that cooperation and coordination, as well as the relationship building, are great ways to build towards that collaboration. And as you're collaborating, I put a couple things there to consider. For-profit world has always used core competencies as their starting point. What are the things that we do best? What is our mission? What are we about? What can't we outsource or what can't we collaborate on in terms of having somebody else do parts of it? So identify that first, and that helps the message and the expansion in the outreach to other people. Some of the easy ways to kind of wander into cooperation or coordination would be sharing administrative expenses. Obviously, not everybody needs a full-time accountant as much as I'd like to say they do. Not everybody needs a full-time HR person or other roles. So how can you potentially share that? And then the other really cool thing that could happen here is we each have a different sphere of influence, but there's some commonalities. And what can we explore and do with that? So Melanie, what are your thoughts on how we're going to take what we're coordinating now to the next level?
I think one of the key components of how we can really take it to the next level is to recognize it, to start with that point of what is it cooperation, is it partnership, is it collaboration, where is it along that spectrum? And I think additionally to the core competencies, to ensure that we're looking at two key components in that being aligned values, that I think that's something that within the nonprofit sector particularly, it's a big advantage in determining who to collaborate with, how that collaboration is going to function, and how it can be most productive. That you need to have those aligned values, and that if you have those aligned values and a shared vision of the world in terms of what you want that to look like, the impact that you want to have, it might be that you're actually finding different missions that are coming together toward a shared vision of the new world with an aligned set of values. So it becomes easier to talk about that collaborative experience or structure, or what the sharing of resources looks like, because it doesn't eke into that realm of competition for funding dollars, or confusing the message. So I think that's going to be really important, is identifying it. I think not being afraid of it. I think that collaboration has often also gotten this kind of sticky feeling for some people of, oh, am I being forced to collaborate? Am I choosing to collaborate? What might that look like? But I think what we've been seeing, and I've noticed that a lot more, the glory of seeing through Facebook posts and other social media posts, nonprofits recognizing the collaborations that are happening. Because I also think that really up until this point, there was more collaboration potentially happening than was even being acknowledged. And now what we're seeing is when you have two completely different organizations understanding they're serving the same client population in different ways, to see them celebrating each other is wonderful. And it inspires other people to do that. It inspires confidence from funders and donors that there's a good way to move this forward. And I do think that there is going to be that call, either out of necessity or because it's being nurtured, for more official and formalized collaborations, potentially moving into that merger position in order to attend to the limited resources that we will be seeing in the balance of the year.
I've loved what some of the things that I have seen too, where we say we care about this population, but we have no expertise here. So who can we partner with to do this with? And that's exactly the point. So maybe I'm really good at education, but I can't reach all the different underserved and different populations. And there's other nonprofits I can coordinate with. So one of the other things you shared with me, Melanie, if you would, about how people are sharing too on Facebook and carrying this on, this collaboration.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, one of the things that I noticed was, so there's a human service organization in Dane County that has really seen an uptick in its services and the need for the services that it's providing. And then there was more of an arts and collaborative organization that surfaced, sharing books between them in order to move their organizations forward. So seeing then both the Reading Project and RISE celebrating that collaboration, and each of them offering up the strengths of the other in doing that. It's great messaging, a great example, and a really nice way of seeing what kind of sharing that expectation differently and changing the narrative for all of us on social media who might have normally thought, oh, that one organization is going. That other organization isn't so much. Yet together, they were both maintaining momentum, moving forward, celebrating their missions in a way that will change things. And I think it's also been fun to see on Facebook, and certainly that's happening a lot today, being May 5th and the Giving Tuesday, that you're seeing nonprofit organizations or executive directors or staff actually doing Facebook fundraisers for the other nonprofit organizations that they support and that they belong to. And it's just this really nice cross-germination, if you will, for the support that exists within communities and within the sector. I think it's been really exciting, and hoping that that's something that is going to continue. In addition to seeing a lot more collaboration, public collaboration with businesses and small businesses, and seeing, how can we do that? And so, Melody, your point earlier about those spheres of influence, I think it's also really important in the future for all of us, and particularly within the nonprofit sector, if you think that there might be the potential for some sort of collaboration that you don't yet know about what it is or who it might be with, just start talking to people. Put yourself out there and to say, there's something here, and I'm not sure if we're the best organization to do it or someone else is, but let's talk. And whether that's coming back to your audit partner or consultants that you're working with or other people to say, I'm thinking about this. Who should I talk to? Find those connectors and let them connect you. And then go,
and realizing that you're not
talk. You know, you're not locked in from day one, which I think is another component about innovation that's really important for people to remember in these times, is where some are really creating new services or exploring new services. I would encourage you to frame a lot of your activity in this time in the fact that it's in response to COVID-19, or it's because of the changing circumstances or the shifting landscape, so that you get the space and the fun that's created by innovation, that's trying things and experimenting without then getting locked into something that you feel compelled to continue because it was a success in May of 2020, but it may not be as applicable by November or next year. So to really think about framing these things within the language and the lens of a pandemic response.
The other thing I have seen as more organizations collaborate or consider collaborations is it forces them back to really thinking about what's their core mission and where have they experienced mission creep. Because, you know, Melanie talked about competing for resources, and sometimes that's the roadblock to creating the collaborative actions, because you're competing for some of the same resources. But you can operate so much more effectively if you're staying on point and you're doing your core competencies and you don't need the same kind of funding. So for-profit businesses have recognized this for a while, and there's a lot to be learned from that world in response to a lot of things. And I encourage nonprofits to step up and demonstrate that here, because I think we've got a huge opportunity to take these lessons and move the whole nonprofit community forward in really achieving the mission and showing the rest of the world. I was just going to share one other quick kind of cooperation. Some of you have looked at in the past doing cooperation or projects with for-profit organizations, partly from a fundraising, partly from an awareness mission kind of organization. But it's really cool during this time, to Melanie's point, these are going to be short-lived cooperation. These are not long-lived events. But how some of them have just naturally arisen without all the corporate red tape that usually comes with that kind of thing. So I saw one this morning on the news with shoes that are being provided for, you know, the health workers. Some that are providing food to pantries or places that they never would before. One of my personal favorites was, because I love Spotted Cow, is that Nuclearis is taking the kegs that they'd have to get rid of, and they're giving it to farmers for fertilizer. So, you know, just so many cool ways that we can all come together. Emily, I'd like to do our last poll, if we could, on collaboration, just to kind of see where everybody's at. And as we look at the results of that, then we'll move forward into some other creative ideas Melanie has. So collaboration with nonprofits, has it always been part of who you are? Is it something new and proving to be effective, or you just don't think it's for you? And be honest, I mean, we're not all at the same spots. So it'd be great to know where your peers are and share that perspective.
Just a couple more seconds for everybody.
Perfect. Emily, this is again off topic, but creative a little bit. And we were talking about ways to implement the food element. Can you share what you were sharing with the birthday party idea with me the other day?
Yeah, for sure. So one of our coworkers, her son had a birthday party to go to, and for the virtual party, the family put together these little boxes and they just dropped them off at the front doorstep. And they played a game that they needed little pieces for, so that was in the box. They did a scavenger hunt list, so they all had the list in their box, and then they said, ready, go, and everybody had to run around their house and pick those up. And then Another really fun thing is they wanted a birthday cake for the kid whose birthday it was. And so they had those little mug cakes that you put in a mug and you throw in the microwave. And so everybody made their own cake in a mug, and then they all sang happy birthday boy, and he blew out his candle. So that was just a really cool way that they made it a virtual event, but also had a physical aspect to it that the kids really enjoyed. So that was kind of fun. And you have to have food. You have to have cake at a birthday party. So.
I love that idea because it was a great pull come out.
For sure. And then,
oh, wow. That is really encouraging. I am so thrilled to see that, because sometimes we get so entrenched in just doing the day-to-day that we don't see that bigger picture. And it's encouraging to see so many of you consider it part of your DNA. With that, we're going to move forward with Melanie's got some very specific ways that we can take what we're learning and move it forward. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you. And I think it's interesting to think about that with collaboration being a part of the DNA for so many nonprofit organizations, there's still an opportunity for that collaboration, or perhaps a requirement for that collaboration, to look different as we continue moving forward, because so much has changed that even some of those more classic collaborative efforts where it was organizations kind of walking maybe side by side, now it's going to be much more connected. And introducing just a way for people to think about what does it mean to move forward? And with all of these different kinds of innovation, if ultimately this is about action, then it needs to be constructive innovation. And that means constructive because you're creating it, and also constructive because it's meaningful and helping you move forward. And so the opportunity that all organizations have is to first to start with clarity, and then spark the curiosity, garner commitment, and foster communication. And to think about those 4 phases, knowing that you can apply that throughout the entire process. And by that, when you think about clarity, and you have to know what's the issue, what are your resources, what is this all about, what's my current state, and what's the problem, where's my gap? And then you can spark that curiosity to then gather your data, your best practices, all of the conversations that you might have with other people, to really go through that discovery process of how are we now going to address this issue or this need with the resources that we have, and then start engaging people in that discovery process to really garner commitment around what that change needs to be, so that you can communicate it really clearly. And if you move into the next slide of thinking about, so I mentioned discovery and data and discussions, what does that all mean? And so first component is to think about having all of this data and discussion around the resources and the context. And resources, we often think, of course, financial resources, but as organizations, we have really 4 kinds of capital and 4 resources. We have the financial capital. We also have to consider our human resources, our people, whether that's because we don't have enough or we have a lot, or we're trying to figure out what the right number is. And then to think about that social capital, those social resources, the spheres of influence that Melody mentioned earlier, and then the intellectual resources. It is the thinking aspect of the specific areas of expertise, the programs, the services, the templates, the frameworks, how you approach the work that you're doing, to be really clear about all of the opportunities and the limitations that you have with your resources, and then how is that balancing with the context within which you find yourself. And that context is looking at the culture of your organization. Have we found with the recent 6 weeks and going through the pandemic that we've noticed some issues with our culture as people are really trying to work differently? Are we aligned with our values? Are we living them forward during times of stress? What is the landscape within which we find ourselves, and what is our position in that landscape? Because we know the landscape has shifted. We also have to make space to think about where is our position in that, and who's going to help to make or break us, what are our priorities, And within the nonprofit sector particularly, what's the community? What are they asking for? What are they now talking about? Where is their energy? Where are they putting those resources? And then what's our intent as the organization? Again, as Melody mentioned, focus on the core. What is that core for your nonprofit and how can you move that forward? And to gather all of that data, and it may sound overwhelming, but it can be a really good just 2-hour time block that you take, carve out for yourself, put a 4-hour block on your calendar where you have a planning meeting, get away from a screen and just start writing, start thinking, and go through what are our resources? What do I think about? How are we doing as an organization? How are we doing in advancing our vision? And then go back to the good journalistic questions. What do we want to accomplish? Where do we need to do it? How are we going to do it? Who's going to be involved? When do we need to do it? And why, all the way through. And those can be kind of a balanced and a combination way of just thinking about that constructive innovation so that ultimately whatever transformation you go through as an organization, it's sustainable. So that, I know we're short on time, so I wanted to throw those things out there.
I appreciate you sharing that because obviously Melanie's just our mind from an organizational standpoint. And there's so much that an organization is holistic, it's not one piece. And just like we've been emphasizing collaboration, as professionals, we collaborate too, because there is no one X piece that solves all part of an organization because it's more holistic. Emily, it looks like you had somebody who wanted to share something yet we wrapped up.
Sure thing. Tracy, did you have something to add?
Looks like she's still on mute.
That's on her end, so maybe not. Oh, Tracy?
No, I don't. Sorry for the confusion. No, I don't.
No problem.
Oh, no worries at all.
What did you want to share with us, Tracy?
Oh, she didn't have anything.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate everybody who's joined us today. The slide deck will go out with the recording. There's information on my contact here as well as Melanie's, so you'll have all of that in the information that you get after the fact. We will follow up on any Q&A questions that have been submitted. And if you have ideas, again, please continue to tell us those things where we can come alongside and partner with you and help you. Anything for wrapping up from you, Emily?
I'm all set. Thank you all so much for joining us. Keep an eye open for an email from us, and please visit our website to see other upcoming webinars that we will be hosting. Ladies?
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
You too.
Thanks.